India's aviation sector is undergoing severe turbulence with soaring fuel prices pushing airlines to the brink. Leading carriers including Air India, IndiGo, SpiceJet have now issued a stark warning to the government saying that industry is under extreme financial stress and could be forced to scale down or even suspend operations if urgent intervention do not come into force. In a letter to the Ministry of Civil Aviation on 26th of April, the Federation of Indian Airlines flagged that aviation turbine fuel or ATF, that is the jet fuel pricing, has become volatile and unpredictable, severely impacting airlines' viabilities. The FIA says that ATF now accounts for nearly 40% of the total operational cost, but in current conditions, that burden has surged dramatically with fuel expenses rising from 30 to 40% earlier to as high as 55 to 60% of the total costs today. A major concern is the widening gap between domestic and international ATF pricing. Airlines say that international fuel prices have jumped by nearly 73 to 75 rupees per litre, making several long-haul and overseas route commercially unviable and loss-making. And this has distorted route economics, forcing airlines to reconsider network and their strategies, cut frequencies and also evaluate shutting down weaker routes. Now, the crisis is being driven by multiple global and domestic factors. Tensions in the West Asia region have pushed up crude prices, while airspace restrictions are forcing longer flight paths, increasing fuel burn, especially on international route. Adding to the pressure, the FIA has highlighted unusually high refinery margins or crack spreads, which are keeping ATF prices elevated even when global crude prices soften, meaning airlines are not benefiting from any dip in oil prices. And on the policy front, airlines have pointed out that India's tax structure is worsening the crisis. Excise duty on ATF, which is currently at 11% for domestic operations, is levied as a percentage of price, amplifying cost pressure when fuel becomes expensive. High VAT rates in key states are also adding to the burden. As immediate relief, the FIA has proposed 3 key steps. First, temporary suspension of 11% excise duty on ATF. Second, reintroduction of crack band pricing mechanism to stabilize fuel rates. And third, reduction of VAT across major aviation hubs. And in a strong warning, the industry body has said that any further irrational spike in ATF prices could lead to unsurmountable losses, forcing airlines to ground aircraft and cancel flights. The ripple effects could be significant: reduced connectivity across cities, sharp increase in airfares, disruption in flight schedules, and a broader hit to India's aviation growth. With additional pressure like rupee depreciation and rising input cost, airlines are now calling for urgent, coordinated government action to stabilize the sector before the situation spirals into a full-scale operational crisis. The Standard also with us is Professor Bejon Mishra, consumer policy expert. Akshay Chopra, aviation expert, is also with us, and so is Shubhamoy Bhattacharya. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking time. Or Shubhamoy, I want to come to you first. This is a rational demand, of course. Many airlines are feeling the heat in the lieu of rising ATF prices, and they want the government to act. But does the government even have the wherewithal? Do they have the runway to act? Could you unmute yourself, please?
Well, actually, quite a bit. The government has quite a bit runway, and one of the reasons for that is ATF price taxes are not just on prices, are not just at central level, but also the state level. Essentially, the pressure is now on the states also, and that is the starting point. It just gives the government at the center, that I mean, to also start telling the states that, look, you also got to join in the process in the shape of giving relief to the airlines. We alone can't do it. So this is something that sort of broad bases the, I should say, government action from the central government to the state government levels. It was coming for some time, and the coordinated letter and makes it clear that the states will have to also now take a part of the burden. The center alone will not be standing around to sort of soak in all the pressure. So that's my first point. Yeah.
will now have to intervene, perhaps give some sort of relief there to airlines, because airlines at this point in time are saying they're crumbling under that pressure. Akshay, I want to come to you. What are you making of the cost pressure? We categorically tried to understand what the cost pressure for airlines was vis-a-vis ATF. It was about 35 to 40% earlier. Now that operational cost has come up significantly. It's about 50 to 60%. ATF alone is about 50 to 60%. Can airlines sustain with these added pressure? Because they're saying they are crumbling. In fact, the Federation has pointed out very categorically that we cannot continue operating and will have to shut our operations on certain routes. In fact, some airlines may not be able to sustain these cost pressures at all.
So Shweta, first of all, thank you for having me. And let me quote some figures here. Like now, the US jet fuel, since the time the Strait of Hormuz has been closed and the war began, it has jumped from $2.5 to approximately $4.6. On the other hand, the jet fuel prices in India have risen from 91,000 per kiloliters in February to almost over 2 lakh now. And now this amounts to, as you said, over 50% of the operational cost of the airlines. And that's why Air India and IndiGo and other airlines are levying now additional charges on the customers for domestic trips up to almost 900 rupees and almost $280 on international flights. On top of that, there has been a huge amount of flight cancellations which are happening. So if we talk about only the overall, the international flights from the world over, more than 150,000 international flights have been cancelled. And since February, as the war began, more than 15,000 Indian flights have been cancelled. So there's a massive pressure on the airlines. But the main problem is that India levies some of the highest fuel taxes and which do not currently come under the fall under GST. Now, our ATF is almost 70 to 80% more expensive than the hubs like Dubai and Singapore. So state, and the major problem is the states. The states charges from almost 5 to 29%, as high as 29%. And same with the when it comes to the central, they have an additional excise duty of 11%. Now, the government has tried to cushion the impact, by capping the increase to almost 25% to shield the passengers and all. And they also announced a 5,000 crore rupees relief package. But we have to really see how much can the government also take the brunt, because there's a limit to both the airlines and the government, because none of them is at fault here at this point of time. It's the international conditions are such. Because of the longer routes, the higher insurance prices, everything is going up. So we are all very uncertain about the future, because the second round of talks have also failed in the war. So we're all looking at the future now.
All looking at the future, and we're looking at a stark reality gradually sinking in, Bejon Mishra, especially for consumers, for that matter, who are now paying exorbitant prices, not just on domestic routes, but also on international routes, but more so on domestic routes where, prices have gone up significantly.
So that the consumers have always been paying, what they have been charged. You see, the point which I'm making is, till you don't bring transparency in these mechanisms, the consumers are all the time feeling that they are being cheated. They are paying an exorbitant price for ticket in terms of what is actually the cost. There has to be a transparency in the costing. We as passengers, we are always happy to pay. But we are happy to pay where we know that we are getting a value for our money. I mean, when the airlines were making profit, or they were getting fuel at a much reasonable and competitive price, they never brought down the airfares. They never passed on those benefits to the consumer. I mean, what I am trying to tell you is that government is also ready to help. Government is who? Government is you, me. We are all government. Government is prepared to help cut down on the tax revenue in terms of mobilizing revenue for the benefit of the citizens. But you also have to understand that they have got something called governance. They have to manage the government. They need money. Where will they get that money from? How will they get that money? We all have to think about it. I mean, we as passengers, we think about it. That's why we agree to pay. Now, in this turmoil, we are all in a turmoil. It's not only the aviation industry. They have to be creative. They have to understand under these circumstances where they can cut the cost, in what manner they can cut the cost, how the airlines can work together to ensure that each one of them share the burden of this turmoil, or they bring in innovation in their thinking, to bring in changes in such a manner that the passenger who is the end user, who is paying the money at the end of the day, feels happy and there's a smile on his face. Want to see that. Now that only will come when you bring in transparency. You are getting a lot of data to us, but we don't know whether the data is truthful or not. We don't know that. We want the truthful data to be presented to the citizens. Then only as passengers we will understand.
Okay.
Has the Federation ever sat with the passenger organizations? Is there a passenger's voice in the policy in our country? There is no passenger voice. There is no representatives of passengers in any of these consultations which the industry does. It's all opaque. They only talk about themselves. They're not talking about the passengers.
Okay.
They're asking things of the government, which the government will consider only if they promise they will give benefits to the passengers.
Okay.
Then only
So let me then take a question from Captain Chopra at this point. Captain Chopra, would you agree that the process, as Bejon Mishra is pointing out, is opaque, that passengers are rarely heard? I mean, we saw what happened during IndiGo crisis. It has no relation to what we're discussing right now, but in a sense, you know, highlights the plight of consumers, whether it's the ATF prices, whether it's the airline not adhering to FDTL norms, or not wanting to adhere to FDTL norms, not planning better. All of these times, in all these circumstances, it's the consumers that have to pay. In fact, you know, questions are now being also asked, why do Indian airlines don't adopt a fuel hedging strategy that many global carriers do?
Yeah. So Shweta, first of all, I 100% agree with Professor Joy, whatever he said, except for the fact that he said that we are happy to pay. I'll just disagree to say that we are happily forced to pay whatever the prices are. And that's why one of the reasons that most of the people are now choosing international holiday destinations than Indian destinations, because the fuel prices are so high, the airline prices are so high that they prefer going abroad than being in India. Now you're right about the fuel hedging. Just for the most of the people, fuel hedging is basically, it's an essential insurance policy. So you get into a contract and you buy the fuel at a lock-in prices for a particular period of time. Now that's the problem, not just in Indian Airlines, it's with other airlines also. So world over, Lufthansa, Air France, KLM, Ryanair, they all hedge fuel. But Indian Airlines, along with that, even United and Delta Airlines, American Airlines, they also don't hedge the fuel, which is a big question. But as I said in the beginning, this is a double impact on the Indian Airlines, because once we don't hedge the fuel, the international prices are going up big time. And on top of that, the huge amount of taxes which are being levied on the airline. So somewhere down the line, the government has to step in and take a strict measure on at least controlling and cushioning in terms of the taxes, not just for this particular period of war, but also in the future. When you compare the prices of airlines outside and in India, there's a huge stark difference. And the difference everybody knows is because of the taxes which the government, both the state and the central government, is levying. So somewhere down the line, as Professor Bijoy said, there has to be an answer to the passenger. Somebody has to represent them and answer the question the government.
Okay, so that's interesting. Shubhamoy, that's where you come in. Is it because of the taxation, or is it because of the refinery margins? Why do ATF prices in this country stay disconnected with crude trends? You know, when crude prices go down, you know, sometimes, not always, people do tend to benefit, although they haven't really benefited in the last 2 to 3 years. But when it comes to ATF, why do they remain disconnected with the crude trends globally? Could you unmute yourself, sir?
Petroleum products form the largest source of taxes for the states. Even for the center, it's 20% of its revenue. Now, given that sort of a stake, the point is that if, as both Captain Chopra and Vijan are saying, that it essentially has to be flexible and transparent. That is not what happens, because the stakes are too high. And because the stakes are too high, first of all, what does the center do? The center says, compared to aviation fuel, the much more visibility is there on petrol and diesel prices at the pump. If those prices rise, then there's a huge problem. So if those prices are going to be capped, then somewhere or the other, somebody else will have to pay the price. To some extent, oil companies are paying the price, the processing companies taking a hit on their profits. In fact, they're not getting profit. They are 1,600 crore loss per day. Indian Oil itself is just 800 crore. So that's massive. The other ones who will take the hit will be the refineries Refineries, therefore, are trying to shield themselves because remember, refineries have been told to produce huge amount of LPG. LPG prices are capped. So refineries are essentially making losses. Losses in the sense that they are not getting the profits, normal variations responding to supply and demand that they would have made. So refineries are also subsidizing the LPG price. The
So,
government, the central government is
Shubha,
making
sorry, just a
petrol diesel
follow-up
prices.
question. Would it be fair to say, therefore, while LPG prices are a priority, ATF prices are not at this point for the government?
At the point. That's where it comes along. So ATF is a price that that is not visible. You know, ATF is not charged separately on a passenger ticket. If it was, then there would have been a problem. But
Yeah,
since ATF gets subsumed within the ticket prices, so therefore it's easier to push ATF prices high. In fact, ATF prices in April 2026 rose by 9.2% on a sequential basis. Now that is quite something. Because of this problem, the the entire the adjustments in the oil economy is not passing through into the economy in smoothly, and I think the government has to basically accept that all around anybody who's using oil and gas will have to pay a higher price. If it wants to give subsidy, as it will want to give subsidy, it should give subsidy upfront, say by giving subsidy to the BPL people. There's no reason why petrol prices for somebody with two cars should stay subsidized. ATF prices being not subsidized and ATF prices going up actually hurts much more of Indians now. Because remember, the aviation market has now reached not only to middle class but even to the lower middle class. So there is a good reason for ATF prices to be bought at to be brought at par with international prices. And if these sort of things adjustments are not done, but only because the optics of the petrol bunk, the diesel bunk is kept into focus, then obviously we'll keep on having this sort of peculiar problems. I'm not saying I don't buy the argument that these companies will be closing down their operations, but definitely they are in very difficult conditions. And that difficult condition has to be accepted that probably affects much more people. If you look at the number of people who are employed in airlines, at the airports, at the ancillaries jobs, it's a large industry that we are talking about taking a hit. So there is a reason why the central government and the state governments have to change the ATF prices.
Okay.
GST, we didn't bring them into GST, but
Which
least.
is what I want to come to you. But let me quickly take an answer from Professor Bejon Mishra. Professor Mishra, we're looking at fewer flights and higher prices. That is what we are essentially staring at least in the near future.
well, Sweta, I wouldn't agree to that because I feel that people who are in business, they know how to conduct their business. And they will make sure that they make profit out of their business. So they will find creative way to manage this crisis. So what I am trying to say, the solution is not only taxation. That's not the solution. Taxation is only one component of it, which may be a major component. But the point is, what I am trying to tell you is that there are mechanisms where you can, like my panel member said about hedging, but in terms of insurance, there are a number of ways to manage that. In terms of track brand, mechanism which was introduced by the government. There have been a number of interventions done, and there is creative ways of doing it in the interest of the passengers. But the passenger has to be there. You cannot take those decisions without the passengers being taken into confidence. It cannot be an industry decision. You cannot blackmail us saying we are going to close the shop. That is not taken. You cannot close the shop. When you made profit, then where did those money go to? What did you do with that money? Where did you park that money? You have to tell the passengers. Use it now. Use those assets now. This is the time to use it. Be creative. Be sympathetic to the passengers. Give them as many flights as possible, but no flight should go empty. Work together so that all the flights go full. You have to help each other. You cannot make SpiceJet go empty. You cannot make them fly empty. No, sorry. Air India has to help them. You have to build mechanisms. I have seen 20 years back in certain countries how the airlines work with each other in the interest of each other, in the interest of the passengers. I came back to India and I told the government to introduce this in the aviation ministry, but the passengers are never heard. They don't have a lobby, unfortunately, and that is good for us. We don't have a lobby like an industry lobby, which tries to blackmail the country. It's not done. Please, this is the time when you have to show your strength. You have to show how concerned you are for those passengers who made you alive and make profit out of them.
Okay.
You have made profit out of them.
So essentially, Captain Chopra, what we are looking at today, airlines saying by the way of their federation, is that either we can remain affordable or we can sustain operations. It's a choice between the two. Either we can fly with the same speed that we are flying, with the same routes we are flying, and at the same prices, but we'll go down unless the state governments intervene. Would it be fair to say that that's the only alternative, either remain affordable or sustain at these current market prices?
So Shweta, sadly at this particular point of time, the answer is yes, and it's a hard yes. Now, as Professor Bijoy also said that, there is no monopoly in this aviation sector in India, but as we have seen in the last IndiGo fiasco, where the one company controls over 60% of the market share, that there is a big monopoly. However, if the government takes the step at the right time, then these changes can be bought in, and the government has cushioned the way the how much it can. But we need to understand that almost 50% of India's crude imports come from the Strait of Hormuz, and the crude prices have gone up to $120 now. And on top of that, the LPG we are importing from that Gulf areas is almost over 90%. So India is taking a brunt in lot of sectors, not just the aviation sector. So a government has only a limitation to how much it can cushion each sector. For example, the MSME, when you talk about basic MSME units, almost 30% units have been shut down. 400,000 jobs are at risk. So at this point of time, the government cannot focus on one particular sector. That's why the aviation sector has to somewhere take the brunt and take the cushion on themselves also. They cannot expect everything from the government. And as Professor Bijoy rightly said, what about the profits you have been making? You are making big time profits because the prices are so high. Now is the time that you need to repay the passenger and make sure that the prices don't go up to the level you want them to. We are okay with paying a slightly higher price because we know that there's a volatility in the market, but then there has to be some cap and some cushion for the passengers out there.
Okay. So I think we all know the problem, Shibamoy, but we're looking at a solution right now. And, as you said, states will have to intervene, but some states charge as much as 25 to 28% VAT on ATF. At the same time, it's the only source of revenue. It's a major source of revenue for the state. So they may not bring down those prices. In absence of that mechanism, what are the long-term options? Is it time now to bring perhaps ATF under GST?
Yes.
Could you unmute yourself, sir?
Certainly, that should have been done a long time ago. Not just ATF, the entire oil mechanism, which has to come into the GST network. So there's no going away from there. I'm not very sure how much hugely profitable the airlines are. That's of course their own problem because they are not very efficient airlines as far as the Indian skies are concerned. There's a lot of weaknesses. The India government also tends to milk the airlines to the extent that it says that it wants to have the aviation network spread out all over the country, but hasn't thought through what that means. There are a lot of smart ways of doing it. Capping prices on tickets isn't the greatest idea. But as of now, if you're looking at what is the most immediate thing that can be done, I think the answer has to be changing the ATF prices at the state level. And also allowing some amount of flexibility in the petrol and diesel prices. These two will have to be brought in. We are unnecessarily subsidizing a large part of our upper middle class by keeping the price of petrol capped. It's not helping. It's the rest of the economy which is taking the burden. Okay. And I think that is something that needs to be really addressed.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure if a lot of people who own two-wheelers and four-wheelers would be happy with that. But for now, petrol and diesel prices remain capped. But at the same time, ATF prices are jumping through the roof, shooting through the roof. And that's remains a pain point for a lot of airlines. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking time out. Shivamoy Bhattacharjee, Professor Bijoy Mishra, Captain Chopra, thank you for taking time out. We, of course, continue to track what these exorbitant ATF prices mean, not only for consumers, but airlines who are now ringing the alarm bell, saying that we cannot continue to operate if ATF prices soar any further.